General Vorath Senkai stood at the center of his warship's bridge and stared at the blue planet spinning slowly below. Earth, a small world at the edge of an unremarkable galaxy. He had seen 1,000 worlds like it before. Some he had conquered in days, others took weeks. None had ever taken more than a single rotation of their sun. He was Rythari, tall, gray-skinned, with 4 muscular arms and deep violet eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. His skin carried bioluminescence, a soft light that shifted with his emotions, though he had trained himself long ago to keep it still and cold. He was 400 years old. He had crushed 19 civilizations under his boots. The Galactic Dominion called him the Hammer of Quiet Stars, and he had earned that name in blood and silence. This mission was supposed to be simple. Earth had been flagged for pre-conquest cultural indexing. That meant his job was to study the species, write a report, and recommend a timeline for invasion. It was paperwork, a task for a lesser officer. But the Dominion Council had sent him because there were rumors about this species. Strange rumors. Whispers that their history was unusually violent. Vorath did not care about whispers. He cared about results. His subcommander, Iliek, stood nearby. Iliek was a chelith, an insectoid creature with clicking mandibles and 4 thin legs that tapped nervously against the metal floor. He was loyal, efficient, and afraid of almost everything. Vorath kept him around because fear made people careful, and careful people made fewer mistakes. "Archivist," Vorath said without turning, "begin the scan." The 3rd member of his team stepped forward. Archivist Denny was old, even by the long-lived standards of her Mivari species. She was small and frail, with pale blue skin that looked like paper stretched over bone. Her eyes were milky white, but they saw more than most. She had spent 300 years cataloging the histories of alien civilizations for the Dominion. She had never once been surprised by what she found. Until now. Denny activated the neural archive. The ship's systems reached down through Earth's atmosphere, through their primitive satellite networks, through their digital libraries and radio signals, and began pulling data. Thousands of years of recorded history flooded into the archive in minutes. Text, images, audio, video, all of it sorted and translated by the ship's intelligence into formats the Dominion could understand. Vorath watched the data stream fill the hollow screen in front of him. Numbers, dates, names of wars. He scanned them with the practiced eye of a general who had read 100 such reports. "Fractured," he said out loud, already composing his assessment. "Tribal. No unified command structure. Multiple competing governments. No planetary defense grid. Recommend standard annexation timeline. 40 rotations should be more than enough." Iliek clicked his mandibles in agreement. "A simple conquest, General." But Denny did not agree. She was standing very still, her milky eyes moving rapidly across a secondary display that only she could see. Her thin fingers trembled slightly. "General," she said quietly, "there is an anomaly." Vorath looked at her. In 19 conquests and hundreds of assessments, Denny had never used that word. "Explain." "The volume of conflict data," Denny said. She pulled a chart onto the main holoscreen. It showed a comparison between Earth and every other species the Dominion had catalogued. The bar representing Earth's internal wars was so tall it ran off the edge of the display. "No species in our records has fought this many wars against itself. Not even close." The nearest comparison was the Vrelith, a species that had nearly destroyed itself in a single civil war before the Dominion absorbed them. Humans had fought thousands of wars. Thousands. Against each other. Over land, over resources, over ideas, over gods, over lines drawn on maps. "And they survived?" Vorath asked. "They did more than survive. Denny said. She pulled up another chart. Population growth, technology advancement, cultural output, all of them climbing upward, in sharp, jagged lines. Every time they nearly destroyed themselves, they rebuilt, faster than before, stronger than before. Their technology is primitive compared to ours, but the rate of advancement is extraordinary. They went from riding animals to splitting atoms in less than 200 years. Vorath said nothing for a long moment. He had seen warlike species before. The galaxy was full of them. But warlike species always followed the same pattern. They fought, they peaked, they burned, they died. It was as predictable as gravity. Every Dominion model confirmed it. Violence without unity always led to extinction. But humans had not followed the pattern. It is an interesting footnote, Vorath said carefully. Nothing more, a statistical outlier. Continue the deep scan. I want their military capabilities, their weapons technology, and their population centers mapped within 2 cycles. Yes, General, Denny said, but she did not look convinced. She turned back to her console and began loading the next phase of the archive, the 20th century. Vorath returned to the viewport. Below him, Earth turned in silence. He could see city lights glittering on the dark side of the planet, millions of them, each one a tiny point of warmth in the cold blackness. He had seen city lights on many worlds. Usually he saw them as targets, resources to be seized, and populations to be processed. He told himself that was what he saw now. Iliek moved to his side. General, the first visual records from their 20th century are loading. Archivist Denny has flagged a conflict she calls World War I. Vorath nodded. Display it. The hollow screen changed. The data gave way to images, moving images captured by the humans themselves. Vorath saw mud, endless churning mud stretching to the horizon under a gray sky. He saw trenches cut into the earth like open wounds. He saw men, human men, standing in those trenches up to their knees in filthy water. Their faces were hollow, their eyes were empty. Their uniforms were torn and caked with dirt and blood. And then the shelling began. The screen filled with fire and noise. Explosions tore the ground apart. Bodies flew through the air. Men screamed. And the ones who survived pulled themselves out of the mud, picked up their weapons, and kept fighting. Vorath watched. His expression did not change. His posture did not shift. But on his gray skin, his bioluminescence flickered. Just once. A brief, involuntary pulse of pale blue light that he could not control and did not expect. Iliek saw it. He had served under Vorath for 60 years and had never seen the general's light shift without permission. He opened his mandibles to speak, then closed them. Some things were better left unspoken. On the screen, the war continued. Men charged into machine gun fire across open ground. They died in rows, in waves, in numbers that made Iliek look away. But more kept coming. Always more. Vorath did not look away. He watched every second, and somewhere deep inside his chest, in a place he had sealed shut centuries ago, something moved. Something small and dangerous. Something that felt like the beginning of a question he was not yet ready to ask. He stood on the bridge of his warship, high above a world he had come to judge, and he watched humans die in the mud, for a cause most of them did not understand. And for the first time in 400 years, General Vorath Senkai did not know what to write in his report. 3 days passed, and Vorath did not leave the bridge. He had stopped eating at regular intervals. He had stopped sleeping in full cycles. Iliek brought him nutrient paste twice a day, and twice a day the paste sat untouched on the console, until Iliek quietly removed it. The general's violet eyes were fixed on the holoscreen, and they did not move. The archive had taken him deeper into the 20th century. The First World War had ended, And Vorath had expected the species to collapse. That was what happened. That was always what happened. A conflict of that scale burned the fight out of a civilization for generations. The Dominion had seen it 100 times. But humans did not collapse. They buried their dead, signed papers, drew new lines on their maps, and within 20 years they did it again. Bigger, worse, on a scale that made the First War look like a skirmish. World War II filled the bridge with fire. Vorath watched the German army sweep across Europe with mechanical precision. He recognized the tactics: rapid territorial seizure, overwhelming force concentration, psychological warfare. It was textbook Dominion strategy, executed by a species that had never even left its own atmosphere. He made a note of that. These humans had independently invented conquest doctrines that the Dominion had taken thousands of years to develop. Then, the archive showed him something else. The camps, the gas chambers, the systematic murder of millions of people based on nothing more than their identity. Vorath had seen genocide before. The galaxy was not kind. But there was something about the cold, industrial efficiency of it that made even him pause. These humans had built factories for death, assembly lines, paperwork, schedules. They had turned horror into bureaucracy. And other humans had fought and died to stop it. That was the part Vorath could not process. The same species that was capable of that darkness was also capable of crossing oceans to end it. Young men who had never seen the inside of those camps volunteered to die on foreign beaches so that strangers might live. The archive showed him a day called D-Day. Thousands of soldiers climbing out of small boats into freezing water, running toward fortified positions that were designed to kill them. The first wave was almost completely destroyed. The second wave saw what happened to the first, and they went anyway. "Archivist," Vorath said, his voice rough from hours of silence. "The soldiers in those boats, were they forced? Were they under neural compliance, chemical compulsion?" Denny checked her data. "No, General. The majority were volunteers. Many had traveled thousands of miles from their homes to participate. They saw the bodies on the beach. They saw the gunfire. And they still left the boats. Yes." Vorath leaned back in his command chair and said nothing for a very long time. The archive moved on. It showed him a city called Stalingrad, a human city reduced to rubble and ash by months of continuous bombardment. Two armies fighting over the skeleton of a dead city in the middle of a frozen wasteland. The conditions were beyond anything the Dominion would consider survivable. Temperatures that would kill most galactic species in hours. No food, no clean water, no shelter. Soldiers fought room by room, floor by floor, wall by wall. They fought with guns, then knives, then bare hands. They fought for 6 months. Vorath pulled up the casualty figures and read them 3 times, because he was certain the archive had made an error. Nearly 2 million dead for a single city. He cross-referenced the data. The numbers were correct. "Iliak," Vorath said quietly. His sub-commander approached, his legs clicking against the floor. "General, in the siege of Rethmora, how long did the Chelith hold the inner wall before surrender?" Iliak straightened. The siege of Rethmora was legendary among his people. 11 days, General. It is considered the greatest act of endurance in Chelith history. The humans held Stalingrad for 200 days. Iliak's mandibles went still. He said nothing because there was nothing to say. The archive continued. It showed Vorath the bombing of London. Night after night, waves of aircraft dropping fire on a civilian population. He expected panic. He expected surrender. He expected the social collapse that every Dominion model predicted when you subjected a civilian population to sustained aerial bombardment. Instead, he watched people climb out of underground shelters every morning, brush dust off their clothes, and go to work. They organized volunteer fire brigades, They shared food. They made jokes. They sent their children to the countryside so the children would be safe. And then they stayed and kept the city running while bombs fell around them. Vorath canceled his next 2 briefings with Dominion High Command. "Archivist," he said, "I want to see more than battles. Show me what they created during these wars. Their art, their music, their personal communications." Denny looked surprised, but complied. The archive shifted. Music filled the bridge. Strange, emotional, human music, played on instruments the Dominion had no names for. Some of it was sad. Some of it was angry. Some of it was so beautiful that Denny stopped working and simply listened. Vorath read letters, thousands of them. Letters written by soldiers to their families. Letters written in the dark, in trenches, in hospitals, in prison camps. They wrote about fear and pain and loneliness. They wrote about the friends they had watched die. They wrote about missing their mothers, their wives, their children. And they wrote about hope. Even in the worst of it, they wrote about what they would do when the war was over. Gardens they would plant, homes they would build, lives they would live. They wrote about the future as if they believed in it, even when every logical calculation said they should not. One letter stopped Vorath completely. It was written by a young soldier the night before a major battle. He was 20 years old. He knew the odds. He knew that most of the men in his unit would not survive the morning. He wrote to his mother. He told her about a sunset he had seen that evening, how the colors had reminded him of the curtains in their kitchen at home. He told her he was not afraid. He told her not to be sad. He told her that whatever happened, he was glad he had come, because some things were worth more than living. Vorath read the letter 4 times. Then he turned off the holoscreen, stood up, and walked to the observation deck without a word. He stood there alone, looking down at Earth. The planet glowed blue and white beneath him, impossibly beautiful against the blackness of space. He could see clouds drifting over an ocean. He could see the faint green of forests and the brown of deserts. Somewhere down there, in the cities and towns and quiet villages, the descendants of those soldiers were living the lives their grandfathers had died to protect. Vorath had conquered 19 worlds. He had stood on the bridges of warships and watched civilizations fall. He had never once questioned whether what he was doing was right, because the Dominion did not ask that question. The Dominion asked only whether it was efficient. But standing on that observation deck, looking down at that small blue world, Vorath felt something shift inside him. It was not doubt. Not yet. It was something quieter than doubt. It was the feeling of a door opening in a room he had forgotten existed. He did not know what was on the other side of that door, but he knew he could not close it again. He stood there until the stars moved, and the planet turned, and the light of Earth's sun touched the edge of the horizon like a line drawn in gold. And in the silence of his own mind, the hammer of quiet stars asked himself a question that no Dominion general had ever asked before. What if they are better than us? On the 7th day, aboard the Falveric, Vorath did something he had never done in his entire military career. He locked the door to the tactical simulation room and told Iliak he was not to be disturbed for any reason. Iliak protested. There were reports to file. Communications from the Dominion Council were stacking up. Fleet Admiral Keth Mora had personally requested an update on the Earth assessment. Vorath listened to all of this with his arms folded across his chest, then repeated his order and closed the door. Inside the simulation room, the walls were lined with holographic projectors capable of recreating any battlefield in Dominion history. Vorath had used this room to plan the conquest of 6 worlds. He knew every function, every variable, every parameter the system could model. He loaded Earth's data into the system and began to work. Vorath studied it with the focus of a general trying to understand an enemy he had never encountered before. Two human superpowers had pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to burn their planet to glass. The doctrine they created had a name that translated roughly into Dominion language as mutual guaranteed annihilation. Both sides knew that if one attacked, both would be destroyed. There would be no winner, only ashes. In every Dominion simulation, in every known case across galactic history, this situation ended the same way. One side would panic. One side would calculate that striking first gave a tiny advantage. And the weapons would fly. It was considered a mathematical certainty. Game theory demanded it. Humans had lived inside this equation for 50 years and never pressed the button. Vorath ran the Dominion's standard game theory model against the Cold War scenario. The model predicted nuclear war within 3 years. 5 years. He adjusted again. 8 years. No matter how he tuned the model, the mathematics said the humans should have destroyed themselves. They did not. For half a century, they stared into the fire and chose, every single day, not to jump. He moved on to their smaller wars, Vietnam, Afghanistan, dozens of insurgencies and guerrilla conflicts across their history. He studied them not as a historian, but as a tactician, looking for patterns he could use. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans were impossible to occupy. Every time a larger force tried to hold human territory against the will of the population, the occupation eventually failed. It did not matter how strong the occupier was. It did not matter how advanced their weapons were. It did not matter how many troops they committed. The humans would resist. They would hide in mountains and jungles and cities. They would build weapons from scrap. They would attack supply lines and vanish into the population. They would fight for years, for decades, for generations if necessary. They would absorb losses that would shatter any other species and keep fighting. Vorath ran a simulation. A standard Dominion pacification force, 50,000 troops with full air and orbital support, against a human insurgency on a single continent. The simulation predicted initial control within 90 rotations. Then, the insurgency began. The Dominion AI tried to model human resistance patterns and failed. It could not predict where they would strike. It could not predict what they would sacrifice. It could not model their willingness to die for an idea. The simulation ended with a Dominion withdrawal after 4 years and catastrophic losses. Vorath ran it again with double the troops. The result was the same. He tripled the force. He ran it with 10 times the standard occupation force, and the simulation simply flagged an error. The AI could not find a stable occupation scenario. Then Denny showed him something that broke him. She had been compiling a secondary archive on her own initiative, focusing not on human wars, but on what happened after them. She called Vorath to her station and displayed the data without commentary. After the Second World War, the winning side did something that had no parallel in Dominion history. The Americans, who had lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting Germany and Japan, turned around and spent enormous amounts of resources rebuilding both countries. They sent food, money, engineers, and materials to the nations that had tried to destroy them. Within a generation, both Germany and Japan were among the most prosperous and technologically advanced civilizations on Earth. Vorath stared at the data. He asked Denny to verify it. She confirmed it 3 times. They rebuilt their enemies, Vorath said. The words sounded wrong in his mouth. They did not fit into any framework he had ever been taught. In the Dominion, defeated species were absorbed, repurposed, or eliminated. You did not rebuild an enemy. That was not strategy. That was not logic. That was something else entirely. It appears to be a recurring pattern, Denny said carefully. After nearly every major conflict, humans invest significant resources in reconstruction. They build schools, hospitals, infrastructure, sometimes for their own people, sometimes for the people they just finished fighting. Why? Denny paused. She had studied thousands of species across her long career. She chose her next words very carefully. I believe, General, that humans have a concept that does not exist in Dominion language. They seem to believe that an enemy is not permanently an enemy, that a defeated people can become an ally if treated with dignity. They call it different things in different cultures, but the closest translation I can find is simply this: they believe in second chances. Vorath stood up from his chair and walked across the simulation room. His bioluminescence was flickering again, and he did not bother to control it. Pale blue light pulsed across his gray skin like waves on a dark ocean. He loaded the final simulation, the one the Dominion Council actually wanted. A full-scale invasion of Earth, 300 warships, standard planetary bombardment, followed by ground occupation, total conquest. The model ran for 6 hours. Vorath watched every minute. The initial phase went as expected. Dominion forces achieved orbital superiority within days. Major cities were neutralized. Human governments collapsed or went underground. Military installations were destroyed. By every standard metric, the conquest was successful within 90 planetary rotations. Then the occupation phase began, and the model fell apart. Human resistance emerged everywhere simultaneously. In cities, in forests, in deserts, in mountains. Organized cells and lone fighters and entire civilian populations had simply refused to cooperate. They sabotaged infrastructure, ambushed patrols, hacked communication networks, and turned every street corner into a potential death trap. The Dominion AI projected that maintaining control would require a permanent garrison larger than any the Dominion had ever deployed. The cost in troops, resources, and time was staggering. But it was the final line of the simulation report that made Vorath sit down and put his head in his hands. The AI had flagged a variable that Vorath had never seen in any conquest simulation before. It read simply, "Warning. Subject species demonstrates adaptive cultural influence. Extended contact between occupation forces and subject population carries significant risk of ideological contamination. Probability of occupation personnel adopting subject cultural values over a standard deployment cycle is 34%. 34%. 1 in 3 Dominion soldiers stationed on Earth would, over time, begin to sympathize with humans, begin to admire them, begin to question the Dominion. The humans would not just resist the invasion. They would convert the invaders. Vorath sat in the dark simulation room and understood, with the clarity of a general reading a battlefield, that he was looking at the most dangerous species the Dominion had ever encountered. Not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, but because of something inside them that no weapon could destroy and no occupation could crush. Something that reached out and changed whatever it touched. A priority transmission appeared on his console. Red markings. Urgent. From Dominion High Command. The text was simple and direct. Submit Conquest Viability Report. Recommend Invasion Timeline. Acknowledge. Vorath read the message. He read it again. He looked at the simulation results still glowing on the wall. He looked at the 34% warning blinking quietly in the corner of the display. He closed the message without responding and sat alone in the dark for a very long time. The second message from Dominion High Command arrived 12 hours after the first. It was not a request. It was not polite. It carried the personal seal of Fleet Admiral Keth Mora, the highest-ranking military officer in the Dominion, and the woman who had taught Vorath everything he knew about war. The message read, "Vorath, you have missed 3 mandatory check-ins. Your silence has been noted by the Council. Submit your report within 1 cycle, or I will be forced to assume you are compromised. Do not make me come find you. Keth." Vorath read it standing at his console, his forearms hanging at his sides. Keth Mora was not a person who made empty threats. She had commanded 200 successful planetary conquests. She had built the Dominion's expansion doctrine from the ground up. She was brilliant, ruthless, and she had once been the closest thing Vorath had to a friend. That friendship would not protect him if she decided he was a threat. Roughly 30 hours by human time. One cycle to write a report that would determine the fate of 8 billion people on the planet below. Vorath sat down and began to write. The words came slowly at first. He was a general, writing a military report, and for 400 years his reports had all said the same thing. Conquest viable. Recommended timeline attached. Resources required as follows. He had written those words so many times they had become automatic, like breathing. But this time, the words would not come. Every time he tried to write conquest viable, he saw the soldiers in the trenches. Every time he tried to estimate an invasion timeline, he saw the people of London climbing out of their shelters to face another day of bombs. Every time he tried to calculate the resources required for occupation, the simulation's warning flashed in his mind. 34%. 1 in 3. Your own soldiers will turn. So Vorath wrote a different report. He wrote the truth. He began with the data. Clean, factual, impossible to dismiss. He laid out the conflict history, the survival rate, the technological advancement curve, the endurance metrics that exceeded every known species in the Dominion's records. He presented the simulation results showing that occupation was functionally impossible at any troop level. He included the cultural contamination warning. Then he went further. He wrote things that no Dominion general had ever put into an official document. He wrote that humans were not a species to be conquered. He wrote that they were a species to be avoided. He argued that any invasion force sent to Earth would face losses beyond anything the Dominion had experienced in its history. He described human guerrilla tactics, their ability to weaponize anything, their refusal to surrender under any conditions. But the most dangerous part of his report was not about war. It was about everything else. Vorath wrote about the letters, the music, the art created in the middle of horror. He wrote about a species that could commit terrible acts and then turn around and rebuild what they had destroyed. He wrote about the concept of mercy, which had no clean translation in the Dominion language. He wrote about soldiers who carried wounded enemies to safety. He wrote about the young man who saw a sunset and wrote to his mother that some things were worth more than living. He called humans a mimetic apex predator, a species whose greatest weapon was not their guns or their bombs, but their ability to make you care about them. He warned that every Dominion soldier who spent time on Earth would eventually ask the same question Vorath was asking now, and the Dominion could not survive that question. He finished the report. Then he transmitted it on the priority channel to Fleet Admiral Keth Mora and the Dominion Council. The response came in less than 2 hours. Vorath was relieved of command, effective immediately. His rank was suspended. He was ordered to surrender control of the Thalveric to Subcommander Iliak and return to Dominion space to face a military tribunal. The charges were dereliction of duty, failure to comply with direct orders, and potential treason. A battle fleet was being assembled. The invasion of Earth would proceed on an accelerated timeline, with or without his report. Iliak received his own orders moments later. He stood in front of Vorath on the bridge, his mandibles trembling, his thin legs tapping against the floor in a rapid, anxious rhythm. He held a datapad displaying his new authority. His compound eyes could not meet Vorath's gaze. "General," Iliak said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I have been ordered to assume command. I am to bring you back to face the Council. I do not want to do this." "I know," Vorath said. "Please, General, withdraw the report. Tell them you made an error. They will forgive a mistake. They will not forgive defiance. It was not an error, Iliak. Iliak closed his mandibles and looked at the floor. He had served Vorath for 60 years. He had followed him into battles that should have killed them both. He did not understand what had happened to his general, but he understood duty. He turned to signal the security team. He was too slow. Vorath had spent 7 days studying human history. He had studied their wars, their strategies, their tactics. But he had also studied something else. He had studied how humans fought when they were alone, outnumbered, and had nothing left but their refusal to quit. He had studied their hackers, their resistance fighters, their spies. He had learned their methods with the same focus he had once used to learn Dominion battle doctrine. In 3 precise movements, Vorath locked down the bridge, sealed the doors, and overrode the ship's command protocols using a bypass technique adapted from human cybersecurity methods the archive had documented. Iliak and the bridge crew were locked out of every system. Vorath stood alone at the central console, 4 hands moving across controls that now answered only to him. "General," Iliak shouted from behind the sealed door. "What are you doing?" Vorath did not answer him. He was busy. He opened every communication channel the Falveric could reach. Military frequencies, civilian frequencies, radio, television, digital networks, satellite uplinks. He aimed them all at Earth and began to broadcast. The message went out in every human language the archive contained: English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, French, Russian, Japanese, dozens more. It reached military installations and government buildings. It reached news stations and universities. It reached phones and computers and radios in homes and offices and cars across the entire planet. Vorath spoke clearly, his translator converting his words in real time. He told them his name. He told them what he was. He told them that a fleet was coming to conquer their world, and that they had approximately 1 solar year to prepare. He told them he was sending them everything he knew about the Dominion: fleet positions, weapons systems, shield frequencies, tactical doctrines, communication codes, every weakness he had ever learned in 400 years of service. He told them he had studied their history. He told them he believed they would be ready. He told them he was sorry for what his people had intended, and that they deserved to choose their own future. Then he transmitted the entire Dominion military database, every file, every blueprint, every classified document he had access to. He encrypted it with a key based on a mathematical pattern he had found hidden in human music, a pattern that human mathematicians would recognize, but Dominion codebreakers would not. The transmission took 11 minutes. When it was done, Vorath stepped back from the console and stood in the center of the bridge with all 4 arms at his sides. His bioluminescence was burning bright gold, a color that Rithari's skin only produced in moments of absolute certainty. He had not felt that color in centuries. The bridge door finally gave way. Iliak stumbled through with a security team behind him, weapons raised. They found Vorath standing calmly, making no move to resist. The holoscreen behind him showed the transmission log, billions of data points, sent to every corner of Earth. Iliak stared at the screen. Then he stared at Vorath. His mandibles opened and closed without sound. Finally, in a voice that cracked with something between horror and awe, he whispered, "What have you done?" Vorath looked past him, through the viewport, at the blue planet that was already receiving his gift. Somewhere down there, humans were reading his message. Somewhere down there, the species that should have destroyed itself 1,000 times over was about to learn it was not alone in the universe. And knowing humans, knowing what he had learned about them in 7 days that had changed everything, they would not waste a single second. "I chose a side," Vorath said. 14 months after a gray-skinned alien broadcast a warning to every radio, television, and phone on the planet, the human species was ready to fight for its survival. It had not been easy. The first weeks after Vorath's transmission were chaos. Governments panicked, stock markets crashed, riots broke out in cities across the world. Religions declared the end of days. Conspiracy theorists said it was a hoax. Military leaders argued over whether the data could be trusted. But the data was real. Human scientists decoded the encryption within 3 weeks using the mathematical key hidden in the transmission, a pattern based on the Fibonacci sequence found in the structure of a Beethoven symphony. Once the files were open, there was no more room for doubt. Blueprints for alien warships, shield frequencies, weapon specifications. It was all there, and it was all real. And then something happened that had never happened before in human history. Every nation on Earth agreed on something. They agreed to fight. Old enemies shook hands in emergency summits. Military alliances that had stood against each other for decades merged into a single command structure. Factories that had been building cars and refrigerators were retooled to build orbital defense platforms. Scientists from every country worked side by side, translating Dominion technology into something humans could build with their own materials and their own hands. The designs were crude compared to the originals. The welds were rough. The systems were held together with human stubbornness and improvisation more than engineering precision. But they worked. In 12 months, humanity built a fleet. 47 warships, constructed in secret shipyards and launched from hidden facilities on 6 continents. They were ugly, angular things, nothing like the sleek curves of Dominion vessels. But they carried railguns that could punch through Dominion hull plating, and they were piloted by men and women who had volunteered, knowing exactly what they were flying into. Vorath watched all of this from the ground. He had escaped the Thalveric in a stolen shuttle during the confusion following his transmission. Ilyek, either out of loyalty or some emotion he could not name, had not fired on the shuttle as it fell toward Earth. Vorath crashed in a field in Central Europe and was immediately surrounded by soldiers pointing weapons at him. He did not resist. He surrendered himself to human custody and offered his services as a military advisor. Many did not trust him. He was kept under armed guard at all times. He slept in a concrete room with no windows. He was questioned repeatedly, sometimes harshly, by intelligence officers who wanted to make sure he was not a spy or a weapon designed to lower their defenses. Vorath accepted all of it without complaint. He answered every question. He provided every detail he could remember. He sat in briefing rooms with human generals and explained Dominion tactics, formation patterns, and the specific weaknesses in their shield harmonics. He drew diagrams with 2 of his 4 hands, while holding a cup of terrible human coffee in a third. The coffee was bitter and strange, but he drank it because a young officer had offered it to him on his first day, and he did not want to be rude. In the months of preparation, Vorath experienced human life in a way the archive never could have shown him. He visited a war memorial in France and stood in a field of white crosses that stretched to the horizon. He watched children play in a park near the facility where he was held, their laughter carrying through the concrete walls. He read human poetry late at night when he could not sleep, which was most nights. He discovered a poet named Wilfred Owen who had written about the First World War, and he read those poems so many times that the paper began to wear thin at the edges. He began to understand what the data and the simulations had only hinted at. Humans were warm, not just metaphorically. They radiated heat. They touched each other constantly. Handshakes, hugs, a hand on a shoulder. They argued passionately about things that did not matter, and then shared meals together as if the argument had never happened. They laughed at things that were not funny, because laughing together felt good. They were messy and contradictory and frustrating and alive in a way that nothing in the Dominion had ever been. Then the fleet came. 300 Dominion warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system on a Tuesday afternoon. Fleet Admiral Keth Mora commanded from the bridge of the Sovereign Will, the largest warship in the Dominion fleet. She had brought enough firepower to glass the planet twice over. She transmitted standard terms of surrender: unconditional disarmament, cultural integration, absorption into the Dominion. Resistance would be met with total annihilation. The human response was broadcast from every transmitter on Earth, and from the 47 warships now rising from the planet's surface. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was delivered by the commander of the United Earth Defense Force, a woman named General Adaeze Okonkwo, and her voice was calm and steady in a way that made Vorath's skin glow warm, because he recognized what it was. It was the voice of someone who had already decided what she was willing to die for. She said, "We do not want this war. We did not start this war, but we will not surrender our world, our people, or our future. If you come for Earth, you will pay for every mile of sky. This is our home. We will defend it." The battle began at 1400 hours Earth Standard Time. The first wave was devastating. Dominion warships tore through the outer defense perimeter with energy weapons that turned human satellites into vapor. 6 human warships were destroyed in the first 3 minutes. The Dominion fleet moved with the precision and coordination of an empire that had won every war it had ever fought. But the humans did not break. The remaining ships regrouped with a speed that the Dominion tactical AI could not predict. They used the debris of their destroyed vessels as cover. They fired railgun slugs at velocities that overwhelmed Dominion point defense systems. When a human ship was too damaged to fight, its crew aimed it at the nearest Dominion carrier and accelerated to maximum speed. 3 Dominion capital ships were destroyed by ramming attacks in the first hour. Ground-based railguns opened fire from hidden bunkers across 6 continents. Magnetic accelerator rounds the size of buses punched through the atmosphere and struck Dominion ships in orbit with the force of small asteroids. The Dominion had not anticipated ground-based weapons of that caliber because no species they had ever encountered had thought to build them. Human drone swarms filled the space between the fleets. Thousands of small expendable machines loaded with explosives that targeted shield generators and engine arrays. They were not sophisticated, they were not elegant, but there were so many of them that the Dominion fleet could not shoot them all down. And then something happened that Dominion communication officers had never encountered in the entire history of galactic warfare. The human pilots began broadcasting music. It came through on every open frequency, old songs from old wars, symphonies that had been written centuries ago, loud, defiant music with driving rhythms and screaming vocals that the Dominion translators could not process. The music served no tactical purpose. It carried no coded messages. It was not a weapon, but it was terrifying, because it meant the humans were not afraid. They were dying by the thousands, and they were playing music. They were singing in the face of annihilation. Vorath stood in an underground command bunker and watched the battle unfold on a wall of screens. Human officers ran back and forth around him, shouting orders, coordinating strikes, processing losses. The room smelled like sweat and coffee and fear and courage. Vorath had never smelled courage before. He did not know it had a smell until that moment. When the music started playing through the communication speakers, Vorath smiled. It was the first time he had ever smiled. Rethari faces were not designed for it, and it looked strange and wrong on his gray features. But it was real. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it was over, the Dominion fleet had lost 102 warships, more than a third of its total force. It was the worst single engagement loss in Dominion history. Keth Mora, who had never retreated from anything in her life, ordered a withdrawal. Before she left, she sent a private message to Vorath, on a channel only they knew. "You have doomed yourself, old friend. The Council will send a larger fleet." Vorath replied on the same channel, "Then they will lose a larger fleet." There was a long silence. Then Keth Mora said something that surprised him. "Your report was the finest piece of military analysis I have ever read. I hope your humans are worth what you have given up." The channel closed, and the Dominion fleet disappeared into the dark between the stars. Earth had won. Not easily. Not without cost. 23 human warships were destroyed. 11 ground installations were hit. Thousands of soldiers and civilians were dead. The planet's orbital space was filled with wreckage and silence. But Earth had won. 6 months later, they built a memorial. It stood on a hill overlooking the ocean, a simple wall of dark stone with the names of everyone who had died in the battle carved into its surface. Humans came from all over the world to stand before it. Some cried, some were silent, some left flowers, some touched the names of people they had loved and pressed their foreheads against the cold stone. Vorath visited the memorial alone, on a quiet evening when the sun was setting over the water. He walked slowly along the wall, reading names he could not pronounce in languages he was still learning. His bioluminescence was dim and steady, a respectful blue-gray. His name was not on the wall. He had insisted on that. He had not fought in the battle. He had only given them the chance to fight. He reached the end of the wall and stopped. There, at the very bottom of the last panel, carved in small letters that he almost missed, someone had added something that was not a name. It read, "For General Vorath, who looked at us and saw what we forget to see in ourselves." Vorath stood very still. He read the words again and again. The sun touched the horizon, and the sky turned gold and red and purple, the same colors that young soldier had described in his letter to his mother so many years ago. The same sunset, the same beauty, the same world, still spinning, still alive, still stubbornly refusing to die. His bioluminescence shifted. Slowly, softly, it changed from blue-gray to warm gold. It spread across his skin like sunlight spreading across water. It was a color that Rithari only produced in moments of deep peace, and Vorath had not felt it since he was a child, before the Dominion taught him that peace was weakness and war was purpose. He stood at the memorial until the stars came out. The same stars that the Dominion claimed to own. The same stars that had watched humanity claw its way up from mud and fire and blood, falling and rising and falling and rising again, always rising through every darkness the universe could throw at them. Somewhere above those stars, the Dominion was planning, building, preparing. They would come again. Vorath knew that. The humans knew that. Everyone knew that. But standing on that hill, on that small blue world, surrounded by the names of the brave dead and the silence of an ocean that had existed before any empire in the galaxy was born, Vorath was not afraid. He had seen what humans could do when the universe told them to kneel. They stood up, and somewhere in the vast and ancient dark, the stars looked down at Earth. And for the first time in galactic history, they had reason to be afraid.